Thank you for attending another press conference here at the office of the Leader of the Opposition. I've always maintained that had the situation not been so tragic in Guyana, we could have all had a good laugh about what's going on, because there's so many occasions to do so based on comical statements and actions by this government. But throughout all of this comedy reflects a very pernicious, worrying situation about the state of affairs in Guyana. And so before I get into talking about the most important thing for all Guyanese at this point in time, which is when are elections going to be held in Guyana, I just want to read you a quotation from Bloomberg. They recently published an article on Guyana. And it says, when Mark Bino, the director of Guyana's Department of Energy, was a boy, he used to play cricket barefoot with his friends in his village outside Georgetown. At the end of the day, his feet, in quote, would be shiny at the bottom. He remembers. We knew oil was around. So this is the person who heads our Department of Energy, giving an interview to Bloomberg television. Bloomberg is read by all. It's a premier business economic news outlet in the world. And when your director of the Department of Energy, the head of our oil department in Guyana, makes such a statement, you recognize how sad the situation is about the state of affairs in our country. And I can imagine how people around the world, and those foreigners, when they read this, what they think about Guyana, how disparaging their views would be about our country. And it is the same sort of incompetence and comical set of statements and actions on the part of the government that causes so little respect for Guyana and our people. And I suspect that this is the same sort of incompetence that took us into the negotiation of the contracts with ExxonMobil, that they walk into the room with their maximum demand, and then all the people on our side said, oh, can you give us $18 million? And then they said, we're happy to do that. And where do we have to sign? And that's the same mindset that, and lack of competence that governed the negotiations with Tullow when they signed a contract with Tullow after we had discovered oil and we knew we had 3 billion barrels of proven reserves, that they would agree to a zero royalty in that contract, because people keep saying it's 1%, but actually it is zero. The royalty is zero because it's recoverable. So this is the tragedy of Guyana today. Having an incompetent government in place squanders all of the opportunities for the future for all Guyanese, and we have become the laughing stock of the international community. When key government officials, imagine the person who is in charge of our total energy department, policy making, makes a statement like this. His foot bottom was shiny, so he knew we had oil. My foot bottom was shiny when I played cricket too on the beach, but I don't think we had oil. Must have been I walked on some dirty thing or there. I just had to start with that because it pains me. It pains me to see this sort of incompetence and how people think about us as Guyanese. Pains me a lot because we had a growing reputation for leading the world almost in the on green policy making and pioneering the sale of forest carbon around the world. That was our reputation. People used to quote what we were doing in Guyana prior to the oil and gas finds. And today to be reduced to the laughing stock because of the incompetence of the government. So I just wanted to start, and I'll return to that theme at some point in time. Now, on elections, I have received several calls from reporters about the details of what took place at our meeting with the full commission. You know, earlier this week, I led a team to meet with the chairperson of GCOM, Justice Claudette Singh, and the 6 commissioners representing the government and opposition. We had what I thought was a good meeting, a very interactive meeting at which several questions from the commissioners representing the government were asked of me, and I responded. And statements were made at the meeting that were positive. So I exited the building, and I thought it was it was a decent thing to do, not to report exactly on the content of the meeting, but allow the chairperson and GCOM to report as to what took place at that meeting. Because in the meeting itself, you had the deputy CEO and the CEO present. But there is one mistake that I make often. I often make the same mistake. That is, I count on the decency of people who have an agenda, that they would come out and report accurately about the meeting. I did not think it was my place to do that. So to my surprise, I just came out and said a good meeting, and I hope that the content of that meeting would be reported or to the media. To my surprise, when I returned to the office, I saw a press release coming out of GCOM, even before the meeting with the commissioners had ended. And in that press release issued by the Secretariat, they were defending the timeline for March elections, March next year, 2020 elections. And then subsequent to that, Vincent Alexander, a commissioner who was there at the meeting, present at the meeting, came out and said, no room for elections in this year. But At the meeting itself, in the presence of the CEO, the deputy CEO, I think the legal officer was there, and all the commissioners, including Vincent Alexander, Mr. Corbin, and Trotman. The chairperson, in summing up, said, "We thank you for coming to the meeting, and we are working towards elections before the end of the year." Not a single objection was raised at that point in time. Yet, we saw, before the meeting ended, the Secretariat defending the timeline of March 20th, as though they were not pleased with that statement that came out of the meeting that the chairperson made. And Vincent Alexander, who was there, did not say a word, came out and said, elections this year out of the window. And so I had counted on the decency of Vincent Alexander and the staff to report faithfully what was said at the meeting, but that did not happen. That is why I just said it's a positive development in the context of what we've been hearing, and I hope that they reflect that. So this is the situation. We have now, the GCOM was supposed to meet today, this morning. I heard that after I left, the APNU nominated commissioner said that you should meet with APNU too. APNU never requested a meeting. I had requested a meeting with the commission several weeks ago. It just happened that it was scheduled only now. But I had requested that meeting. So now, at this late stage, they had to postpone the meeting today to accommodate APNU coming to the meeting tomorrow. They couldn't even come today to the meeting to accommodate them coming tomorrow. And guess what? Guess what I suspect will happen? In spite of all their public statements. And what are the public statements? We want elections before the end of the year. That is from APNU. AFC met with the Private Sector Commission and issued a press release saying the protracted delay, a prolonged delay in elections is affecting business and investment. These are the public signals that they're sending. But in spite of those public signals, they will go tomorrow and try to delay the timeline for elections once again. Once again, we'll delay this. So I've seen a lot of confusing statements coming out, and they use the Chronicle. Well, you know the Chronicle has had a remake, a new board recently, and the board was put there entirely to make the Chronicle the mouthpiece of the APNU, in fact, PNC. So its attempt at objectivity is, well, to think of it as objective would be a far stretch. So the Chronicle today says, GCOM plan to merge lists. That's the headline. And says, the government through the Attorney General's chamber is moving to the courts to ask for a stay in the decision by the Guyana Elections Commission to merge the data gathered from the recently concluded house-to-house registration with the existing NRR. This is precisely what we've been fighting for, and what they're saying must happen. And now they're going to the court, the Attorney General, to try to stop it. This is precisely what we are saying. It cannot be merged. It cannot be merged because if you have a database here that is verified, the NRR, and you have 370,000 registrants, 368,000 of whom may be people who were re-registered, still on the old database. If you merge the two, their names will be on the database twice. We have been saying that. The Attorney General wants to go to court to prevent the merger, and GCOM has put together a schedule based on the urging of their commissioners to take 3 months to do this merger so that we will start claims and objection which can start immediately, that will now start on November 19th on the basis of their proposal, which includes the merger. So I don't understand what this is, unless the Attorney General, which is not unusual for him, may have misinterpreted the whole situation. He doesn't know what he's talking about. So this is the first thing in Chronicle, the PNC rag. Then another one, a recipe for gridlock, another article, and it says, legal electoral experts warn that the failure to produce ID cards can plunge the country in another round of legal actions. Now, they say Esther Pereira case has turned on its own facts. So I don't want to repeat again that an election was vitiated by Justice Claudette Singh. That meant we had to go back, cut short the term under the PPP because ID card was used was the method of identification for people to vote. And that was, the two parties had agreed to this. And then after the PNC lost the elections, they challenged the use of the ID card. And since then, at every election, every Guyanese knows that since that period, several years ago, decades ago, that you can vote with your ID card, if you have one, or a passport, or even if you don't have any such document, your picture is on the voters list. That's why we opted to put people's picture on the voters list. Now many countries have that. Next to your name, a picture of the person. And you can then take a note. So now this is it. Mr. Corbyn himself said at the meeting, one of their commissioners, that production of the ID card will not affect the timeline for elections because it's not on the critical path. So, and of course, Vincent Alexander says GCOM timetable can't facilitate elections this year. He speaks for GCOM when the chairperson of GCOM said we are working towards elections before the end of the year. So he will do everything to undermine this. Although at the meeting, he doesn't do much. Well, I hope tomorrow when they go there that they are prepared to be interrogated, because the commissioners on the other side asked me several questions and I dealt with them on almost every issue. And I dealt with them. So whoever goes to represent them will have several matters to deal with. But this brings me now to, as part of their campaign of misinformation, that is why I'm saying to you and the public through this press conference that there's an entire campaign of misinformation using the Chronicle. And then Harman, at his press conference, still calling it post-cabinet press conference. And let me just say to all of those companies that are getting contracts approved by this cabinet now, that none of those contracts are valid. none of them are valid that receive no objection from cabinet. And we will treat them as contracts that have been illegally granted. So what I can say to you, this is what Harman is saying, is that I have heard no credible, practical, and efficient alternative to what the Elections Commission is suggesting. That is merging. That is the Secretariat, actually. We have heard statements from the opposition that they can do this and they can do that. Let them take that information to the Elections Commission and let the commission interrogate it to see what you will find. Well, we did. We took the information and the entire commission interrogated us. And I will tell you the nature of what we suggested, because it's not a secret. I've mentioned it here before. It's just that Harman, in his jaundiced way, is not listening to the issue. And he says here, my information in his press conference from one of the commissioners is that the process suggested by the BBP will take an even longer time than what GCOM is suggesting. This is what Harman, Vincent Alexander told him this, or somebody from one of the commissioners told him this. So let me repeat what we suggested. We argued for the reasons I've outlined before, that you cannot merge the two databases. First of all, there is no database to merge. There's only one database now, the NRR, which is preserved. The database that they want to merge, they say they will merge, is being created now, because as of a week ago, they had only inputted 120,000 of the 370,000 persons they claim to have registered. So they are still inputting that data now to create a database. Then we argued, even when you take weeks to create this new database, you still cannot merge the two because you have duplicate names. So the purpose of your so-called merger is to only take the new registrants to the old list, because you can't put people's names on the list twice. So only the new registrants should be or can be added by law to the new list, to the old list. So why do we have to take 3 months to find out who these new registrants are? And spend nearly, through the fingerprinting exercise, millions of Guyana dollars to do so by cross-referencing fingerprints. I'll come to that in a moment to show you how that in itself will not identify duplicate names. And you still have to do it at the end of the activity. So why isn't there a simpler way to find out who these new registrants are? So we extrapolated from the past how many in a normal cycle, how many new registrants you get. And I surmised, I said at the meeting, there will be about, we believe, about 3,000 new registrants of the 370,000 people. So Mr. Trotman said, dear Commissioner, no, it could be more. So I said to him, how do you know that? You can't dispute my figure because GCOM doesn't know. Imagine the Commission doesn't know this, and he doesn't know. But based on historical numbers, this is a credible figure. So if we have 29 permanent offices, In the claims and objection period, we suggested that you now extract the PLE immediately, go to claims and objections, and ask the 3,000 people who had registered in this house-to-house activity, new registrants only, to come and re-register. You can set, there are 29 offices, but you can set up sub-offices, more sub-offices. But assuming you only maintain 29 offices, that only requires just maybe 100 persons to re-register per office across the country. And it could be done in a day or two, re-registering the people who had been re-registered or registered in the house-to-house activity. So the issue came up, will this not disadvantage those 3,000 people? They have to come out back again and register. And I said to them, you are prepared to disadvantage 500,000 Guyanese by re-registering them when they didn't have to register again. That's what the Chief Justice stopped. But you can't disadvantage 3,000 people and have them come back and register. And that will save us 3 months. But you want to merge this database with the national database, but I believe there is a sinister plan with this so-called merger. Because what happens is that the 370,000 names, I said to, let me give you the two options. When you do, if you go to register the names, the new registrants in a claims and objection period, the registrants have to come in. They're physically present. You see them. Secondly, they sign up the documents. Thirdly, there is a house-to-house verification. You have to visit them. The senior officer, the RO, has to visit every home before they get added to the database. Those were checks and balances we put in place in the past. And this has to be done in the presence of scrutineers. When in this house-to-house registration, guess how people were registered? They have 3,400 or so enumerators. So now I asked the commission members, are you prepared to put your neck on the block for the 3,400 enumerators that they did not do anything illegal? Because we have cases where we believe that you had illegal registration. And they were only there with APNU scrutineers. So just imagine they registered, say, 5,000 people who had not been registered, who shouldn't be registered, not eligible to be registered. When you cross-reference fingerprinting, that will not pick up those as illegal registrants because you don't see them physically. So their fingerprint would be valid, so you're only matching fingerprinting and the fingerprints. So they get on the voters list without being verified. With the claims and objection we are proposing, you verify every new registrant. You have to verify every new registrant before they get onto this sacred database that the Chief Justice preserved. She said, you can't touch this. You can't touch people. You can't remove their names from there. Because they said their names had gotten there over the years. Only if they, of course, only if they're dead and other things, you can remove them. They're based on the Constitution. So this is what we are proposing. We said the merger can't take place because if you merge the entire 370, first of all, you don't have a database, but if you do merge it, you're going to have duplicate names. Person's name twice on the NRR and possibly on the voters list. Two, that you only need to merge to get new registrants added to the list. And that could be done through claims and objection, which can start immediately, and it's a more transparent process. It's a more transparent process. And with us doing that, we can be ready for elections long before the end of the year. But APNU, I suspect that there is something sinister in these 370 names. That's why they want to merge it without verifying. They want to merge without verifying the new names. And they want to hang on to elections. So we made, Harmon, we made a proposal. We've been making this all along. It is not something strange. It has been used before for all the elections prior to this one. And we claim, at the meeting I said, how is it that this commission went to 4 elections using the same list and not a word came from the political parties that the list was not credible and that list was valid up to April 30th of this year? And how come the political parties never complained about it? And you, as commissioners, you're now arguing about issues with the list. You never mention a word. Vincent Alexander said in 2011 he said something. You know, pure nonsense, utter nonsense, because no public statements. They went to elections with that list. The CEO defended the list. So when I hear credible lists, and that's what GCOM keeps doing now. So they talk about credible lists, the last press release. Their language is now reflecting that of the PNC. Everywhere where the Carter Center mentioned today, credible elections. Credible elections. We need, but the list, they make it look like the list is not credible. So it's not credible lists, credible elections we need. And to do that, there are more things than the list. The list has to be verified. What they're trying to do is to damage the integrity of the list by merging unverified, unscrutinized data that is potentially flawed, bloated, because of the enumerators, the 3,400, many who would have made mistakes and all these things too, apart from the obvious, the shenanigans. That's what they want to go unverified to the new database. We want verified data to move into the database, and that could be done in a swift period through claims and objection. Swiftly through claims and objection, we can have elections before the end of the year. But apart from that, there are other things that are vital to the conduct of elections and credible elections. One is international presence. Before 2014, we had international staff embedded in the commission. The APNU commissioners and the chairman, Mr. Patterson, who was there, requested help from the UN. When the UN came out with a report saying no house-to-house registration, they refused the help. The UN tried to meet with them several times. They refused to meet. And until now, that offer is still there on the table. I said to the Commission when I met with them that we must seek immediately to have an international presence for quality control in GCOM, because the way Mr. Lowenfield and some elements in the Secretariat are acting, you need another pair of eyes. They seem to reflect all the concerns of APNU every single day. In fact, going overboard to make their case. So we argued at the level of the Commission that they need international presence. President Granger, if he's concerned about credible elections, how come he's not making the case that we can get a lot of international help, etc.? They don't want that. They don't want that. But a commission, an independent commission, should seek international help immediately to look at polling their activities and their integrity, to look at the integrity of the voters list, the tabulation process, to have a separate report, an independent report on quality control going to the commission. and shared with the political parties. So you have a multiple set of eyes in there. I'm sure that many organizations, the OAS, the Commonwealth, the UN, and bilateral donors are prepared to assist immediately. In fact, they have said this to me, that they are prepared to assist the Commission in ensuring credible elections. The third thing I mentioned with the Commission is a transparent process for recruiting polling day staff and random placement of staff. Because given what we have seen in the Secretariat now, if they had control over placing staff, they may place some people, you know, I wouldn't put it past them to recruit people who are aligned and place them in some polling places. We want a system where, we say within a region, you have random placement. So nobody knows where they're going. Everybody is trained, and you then have a system for random placement of polling day officials. So you can't have a pattern of behavior. All of these things we raise with the Commission to ensure credible elections, But they don't want that. They keep hanging on to merger, no merger, merge, ID cards, etc., just to delay the elections. Delay. This government is fearful of elections. So those were some of the issues that we discussed at the Commission. But it seems as though the only purpose of their APNU now and some of these commissioners to delay the elections, as you've seen from the public statement. And they didn't object, not a single person objected when the chairperson said that. And I thought they would have said this to the media. That's why I did not personally say it. I did not. I thought that they would have, the GCOM itself would have said it. Instead, they came out with something totally contradictory of what was said at the meeting. That is the Secretariat. Something about why they need 55 days. 55 days is not against the law for nomination day. 55 days. The law says 32 days. They push it to 55 and somehow taking issue that some newspaper had said that it may be against the law. The point that the newspaper was making is that why move from 32 days, which is the statutory period by law, to 55 days now? They're just building in all of these excessive timelines just to push us into elections next year. And that's done at the Secretariat level. If you interrogate that whole plan, you will see that elections could be held in November. But I suspect, once again, look out for them coming tomorrow with another set of excuses when they go to GCOM there. And so, what's their game plan? What's their game plan? Why, in spite of the international community wanting elections as soon as possible, they all say that to me, the Guyanese just tired of waiting. Everybody wants it. The private sector, everyone wants to get this over with. Their lives are on the hold. Why does this corrupt geriatric cabal wants to delay the elections? And so I think most Guyanese by now would understand their game plan. So the first is to award as many contracts as they could and collect as much money as they can in a private capacity and for the party campaign. That's going on now. So if you get a contract from the government, you have to donate part of it to the campaign and part of it private capacity. I've had several people who came and said, we need the contract, but when we have to make the donations, that's the whole profit is gone there. People who are coming in now. So they're busy doing that. Remember, they raised the ministerial limit. So now, prior to this, minister within his ministry could have awarded contract only up to $10 million. You had to get cabinets, no objection beyond that. They moved that limit up to $20 million now, so the ministers can award contracts. If you check Patterson's ministry, $500 million have already gone in contracts. A lot not tendered, not following open, transparent procurement process. People are called in, contracts are handed out. So that is taking place on a massive scale. The outreach, Harman said it's provided for in the budget. Well, what they've spent about $2 billion on the outreach. So the outreach is part of their campaign, but part of it, the outreach, is for corrupt purposes too. So they have all of these people who are like a whole set of carrions surrounding the dead meat, which is APNU. And they are fleecing of taxpayers. Actually, no. Maybe the Treasury is what they're feasting off of. So what they rent tents, and then they get a big kickback on the tent. The food, you should see the food bill for these outreaches, runs into millions of dollars. But it's actually hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the excess goes to individuals. They are making up receipts for travel and subsistence. Ministers are doing this. We know this is being done regularly in the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs. Making up bills. And they are drawing down millions of dollars from the outreach. Imagine spending over $2 billion of taxpayers' money on outreaches that are meaningless to Guyanese. Meaningless, it's just them campaigning with a whole entourage, feeding them, putting them up in tents, hotels, etc. We're paying for it, but then added to that, more than half of the money, I estimate, is being stolen. So that's happening too. Then they're giving themselves time for the land to be given out. So NISIL is doing this, Lands and Surveys, all of these agencies are busy handing out land. I'm telling you, you will be shocked. In fact, this is going to be so serious after the government changes that we'd have to, first of all, we revoke all of these sales. They're done illegally. And secondly, people are going to face consequences for the wanton giveaway of large tracts of land without any tender to foreigners too. The foreigners are reaping the windfall here. Windfall because they're prepared to pay bribes for prime pieces of land that the state owns. Land that could go into housing in the future, etc., are being given out. Hundreds of acres on the East Coast, the cane land. We will need for the 10,000 house lots a year that we are promising, 50,000 over the 5 years period, that we need a lot of those lands to develop the house lots on for people. Now they're giving out huge tracts, 200 acres, 300 acres on them, and not for housing development. Not for housing development. So even if it was going for housing development, like when we had an open tender and we said all the developers can tender, and then we look at your plan and you get the land for developing housing schemes. None of that is being done, no plan, no tender, and those are the lands we'll need badly to do the house lots. So So we'd have to do that. But that's going on in the meantime. Then we have some information which will come out later about money flowing into bank accounts abroad, people looking for jobs, including ministers, have already started scouting around. They're busy buying. You should check how many have purchased duty-free vehicles in this period. So whilst they're delaying there, they're either they're creating nesting eggs, making exit plans, etc. Not focusing on doing the things that are right, respecting the Constitution or anything else. That's what they're hanging on to do. They need the elections. And then they're hoping to change the fortunes on the ground. So they've hired some massive PR companies paid for by taxpayers. When I told you we hired Mercury, we did it from donations, not from taxpayers' money. They hired their PR firms using government money and money that they're extorting from the business community. Extortion. And so look at what we have now as a result of the PR. So beautiful images of President Granger, photoshopped images, meeting 1 indigenous children, 2 with an indigenous leader, 3 walking down here with an Amerindian leader, here in conversation with an indigenous person. Sponsored posts, taxpayers' money. And I wonder what must be going through his mind or the children's mind when they met him. To see these same Amerindian kids. I'm sure many of them are thinking that your government, as soon as it got into office, took away the jobs from 1,972 Amerindians who were working and getting $30,000 a month. And if you multiply $30,000 a month by 12 months in the year and by 1,972 persons, you realize that they took over $700 million out of the village economies, Amerindian villages. That's what they must be thinking. And they must be thinking, why are you shaking our hands now, the school kids, when you took away our $10,000 grant? If you love us so much, why did you do that? And when he meets with a Tushao, they must be thinking, what about the land commission? What about our land titles? When he meets with these indigenous leaders, you came into office promising to accelerate land title. The PPP left in that program 10 million US and a unit to do this, and you have not done a single one now. Now he's just made some announcements that they intend to do some. This is 4.5 years later. So that is what these people, they took away the solar panels from the hinterland. What have he done in terms, they put a tax on hinterland travel. People who live in Mabaruma and Region 1 now have to pay taxes on their water and their soft drink, etc. These Amerindians. And so if he thinks that these sponsored posts with spruced up images and Photoshop pictures and making him look benign, the caring president. Well, this has been the most uncaring president we have had. He's devastated people's lives. And he gets away with it with these sponsored posts. Now, so another sponsored post, promise delivered, creating jobs and delivering quality services. Tell me what him standing up at a podium means to this. Look at this. Look at the promise delivered, creating jobs and delivering quality services. Look at the image. Isn't this an insult to our intelligence as Guyanese? This is a pure insult to our intelligence. Who is he hoping to fool? Standing up at the podium, most likely talking about something extraneous to Guyana or selling us out once again. And that is what they fulfill a promise on. So these kids and people, talking about jobs and young people, improving infrastructure to facilitate community development. What infrastructure? Even the Sheriff Street Road, I told you, Sheriff Street Road, PPP project. The East Coast Road, PPP project. The West Coast Road, you did PPP project. What have you come up with? We heard from Patterson, they're going to start building the road from Bartica to Parika. We haven't even done the study as yet, the feasibility study, but it's going to do that. We heard that they're starting to bridge the river. In 2017, they will start bridging the river in Linden across the Demerara Bridge. We're not even close to a study as yet for that. We heard they're going to pave the road from Linden to the airport and build a bridge across the Kurupukari. Where is that? The feasibility study. They had the access to the funds from the British grant. That hasn't even started as yet. The feasibility study is now being completed. We heard about some waterfront project. But in the meantime, they've had other projects. Patterson, Notorious Harbor Bridge. Notorious Harbor Bridge. Patterson going to China and getting 9,000 paid into his private bank account. That is what we're getting. And they did one thing that we had in the project, but we were a little bit reluctant to implement. It's the elevators on the East Bank, the overpass and the elevators. So now they have hired some people to man these elevators. I got to take a ride one day. I want to invite you to go up the East Bank and look at these overpass and take a ride, because they hired 8 or 9 persons to now operate these elevators. I heard the goats are using their thing, because goats like to climb high, so nobody using these overpass. But that's Patterson's vision for you. So this is it. Promise delivered. Empowering youths to become Guyana's next leader. Isn't this shameful? Isn't this shameful? Imagine all of the people, look through the things. Sarah, Clive Thomas, Trotman, Eric Phillips, Ogunse, Lincoln Lewis, the whole cabinet. It's a bunch that young people are endangered species. Now, the IUCN doesn't even have a list. You have a red list of endangered species, etc. Young people in APNU are even off the chart for IUCN. They don't have a category even for young people there. It's off the chart. Young people, and now he takes a picture empowering youths to become Guyana's next leaders. Now they need young people, so he's taking pictures. Pictures don't mean anything when the kids don't have a job. When you increase university education by 35% after you promise free education. This is it. Providing job opportunities for Guyanese youth. And that's it. Cook up. He wants. We need our kids to, and I always say this, I like cook up, so I'm not saying anything bad about cook up. I love cook up. But my thing is that we got to prepare our kids for oil and gas, to control that sector. Control it, not for the foreigners. And all the other industries, the related industries in every sector. Not to do pepper sauce and cook up alone. That's it. So this is what they're hanging on for. Stealing, making money for themselves, campaigning using state funds, all of these things, and hoping they can, in the meantime, whilst they're hanging on, they can change the feeling of Guyanese, who all feel betrayed by this government. Those who voted for them feel betrayed by the government, and they are neglected too. Not just betrayed, but totally neglected. And I'm talking about people of every political persuasion. Even APNU supporters feel that way, and people of every race. It's not a single group of persons who feel that this government, which feels that this government is useless and corrupt. Everybody, and they just can't wait for elections, and they know that. But by doing these sponsored posts, you watch out for more the nice spruced up image of Granger, and trying to distance him from the cesspool that he's governing over. Every minister giving contracts to themselves, buying things here, etc. So as part of his outreach too, it's not done there. This is part of their PR. So he now starts going out to meet with the interest groups, people that he shunned, that he ignored, that he arrogantly was dismissive of. He suddenly wants to meet with them, obviously to make new promises. People who supported him. So the miners had been writing him to meet for several years. They have highlighted all the issues faced by the miners. Roads, the impassable state of the roads, the changes to the tax regime last week. I dealt with what those were, the adverse changes, etc. The environment. And he has ignored them completely. And then he suddenly had a change of mind. So in this period again, hoping he could fool the miners to repeat the performance, the three-card trick that he pulled on Guyana in 2015. So he meets with the miners. He invites them to a state-sponsored luncheon, taxpayers' money again, to campaign. And he told them, I'm working towards a decade of development from 2020 to 2029. This guy doesn't even read the contract. He would not even read the ExxonMobil contract. And he's working on a decade of development from 2020 to 2029. His government has been the government in the entire period, even under Burnham. There has been no increase, that dramatic increase in taxation by any government in the, I'm not going to speak about the colonial era, but in the independent Guyana. Since his government took office, the total tax collection, I'm not going to go through individual because that will take a long time, but the total tax collections have increased by close to 70% over the 2014 base, the last year that the PPP passed the budget. 70% overall more they're collecting in taxes. Nearly $100 billion more from Guyanese in taxes. And then he talks about a decade of development. This has been a period of the most rapid borrowing since 1992. Rapid borrowing, and from domestic sources. We've lost the most jobs in these 4.5 years or so, and then the entire history of the period, even when Hoyt was retrenching people in the public service. That's his legacy. Loss of jobs, taxation, borrowing, no vision, incompetent ministers, the most corrupt government in our history. And that's what he's asking us to forget and re-elect him. So that's what he says to the miners. And then he says further, when they ask him about taxation, he says, I would encourage him, Minister Jordan, to examine ways and means at looking at these concessions. So the people were asking just to go back to status quo ante, what was there under the PPP. They were just asking for that. And he said, imagine a president. I've been president for a long time. If people come to me, I'll say immediately, because I'll go prepared to the meeting, I'll say, I can accommodate this request. I cannot accommodate that one. I have looked at the numbers here, etc. He farms it out. He said, I'd have my minister look at it. He goes there to meet the miners. You just increase all these taxes on the miners. You're doing nothing about the roads. The thievery that's going on with mining lands and the transfer of lands to ministers and their families through the syndicates, etc., going on. People complain about it. And then they say, are we going to get help? And he said, I'll ask my minister to look at whether he can accommodate this. This is the level of aloofness. How can you have a leader like that who charts a future for the country? Who knows very little or is prepared to take any responsibility? He farms it out to Jordan. And you know Jordan. You know Jordan. Not that we're going to get much more. So he says we don't want a higgledy-piggledy taxation in which we give A and B concessions because C and D will demand concessions as well. Well, you know what? They have returned, and if you look at our manifesto, the popular version, which will come out sometime next week, because we want to lay out all our plans for these various sectors and get it in people's hands very early. And then a more technical version will come out as we get closer to the election. But you will see one promise is to go back to processing duty-free concessions in a non-political fashion. We had taken the politicians out. So when as Minister of Finance, then President, we said that the Ministry of Finance must not process duty-free concessions. Prior to that, when we got into office, Carl Greenidge used to sign on the duty-free letters. In the early days, that's how it was. The minister had to sign. I did on a few. And then we changed the system. We said, if you apply, we are going to enshrine all your benefits in law, the concessions. You go invest, a technical body, and GRA. Don't come to the minister, because we didn't want politicians to be negotiating how much concessions you get. It should be rule-based. They changed that. And so now, in the last budget, November last year, you can go to the Minister of Finance, and you can say, you know, I don't like this VAT here. And he'd say, all right, I'll reduce your VAT. And the interest on penalties, he can wipe that out too. They've returned to the higgledy-piggledy, the same thing he said, higgledy-piggledy taxation. And this is to facilitate corruption. And that is one of our promises. We'll go back to a rule-based system. A rule-based system, higgledy-piggledy. And I wonder, one of the tasks of the GRA is to try to eliminate anomalies. This is what the president said. Well, how anomalous is it when you can give the minister's son a car for sale without any tender for $250,000 or $300,000 and another member of the family? How anomalous is that? And not only that, but over 300 vehicles that you seize, not go to public tender, but hand it out at peppercorn prices to ministers, their families, and friends of the PNC. Luxury vehicles being sold for $500,000 Ghana. That is inclusive of taxes. And until now, we can't get the list because it's a state-guarded secret. You know, it's our nuclear secret in GRA, where we can't find out who they sold these vehicles to. Nuclear secret. You know, if we find out that, the Americans need the CIA to come and examine this and stuff. They're going to use it to improve their nuclear program, or the Chinese. If Statia only releases this information about who they sold these duty-free vehicles to. So pure nonsense. It's hollow words again. And then he says he wants the miners to have settled communities with proper infrastructure. So every place that our miners move now, you know how we got gold shout here. So if they move their excavators there, you gotta put up a community with power and water and everything else. So when they mine out the area, they can't move again. You have a community there. It's nonsense. You can't provide power in Georgetown. You want to provide power in the hinterland for the miners now? You can't provide proper infrastructure here. The water, the well gone down by Pradoville area where I lived a couple of weeks ago. I wasn't getting water. And you were telling me about that's what you're telling the miners? The miners were laughing. Do you think these small miners think, oh, I don't want to settle there. I just want to mine there and come back to my nice home in Georgetown or somewhere else in the country or Bartica? That's what a president who is distant from reality. This is what we have in Granger. So I'm just telling you this all because he's going to go to meet with the GMSA now. And that will be after the 18th. So he's going to get a different kind of reception. Trust me, after the 18th. And he's going to get a different kind of reception. And he's going to tell them, oh, I love you so much, but he's put the taxes on machinery and equipment, as we spoke the last press conference, and VAT and everything else. VAT on exports, etc. They can't even run their business because the power supply is unstable. But he'll go and speak to the GMSA and tell them, you know what, I believe in a green economy and I want to do value added and all of that. I can almost write his speech here. Tell you what he would say. It's so predictable. So this brings me to one more thing. And they have, so I met with the ERC, the Ethnic Relations Commission. And one of the very nice persons there was Mr. Barrington Brafitt, and at the meeting, and we had a nice meeting, but then he goes out and repeats in the Chronicle. The Chronicle is serializing the lies now about the period when APNU-inspired violence put this country at risk. And I would say to Mr. Barrington Brafitt, if they believe so many wrongs took place, why not hold a commission of inquiry? Get an international set of jurists to come and hold a proper commission of inquiry. And his brothers, the same brothers he said he has, will be implicated. But he is rolled out to as part of the geriatric cabal to disparage the PPP. And he speaks about Roger Khan and about a letter, some paid advertisement that Roger Khan had about helping the government. He also had a paid advertisement about being close to Felix, Winston Felix. They were in deals together. And that he was prepared to take a polygraph test. And he said, would Winston Felix take the polygraph test? I know Felix is very worried about this happening. So I'm not going to go through this again. This is the old. And estimated, he gone back to it, some activists estimated that around 400 Afro-Guyanese males were gunned down. Imagine this guy lives in a time war, and he is a member of the Ethnic Relations Commission and peddles all of these racist lies. He is a member of the ERC. So guess what the ERC asked me? The ERC said, what are you doing about Vishnu Prasad? Member of the ERC? And I said, Vishnu Prasad? What is the ERC doing? If Vishnu Prasad was the CEO, the deputy CEO at GCOM, that when in the recruitment process was found to be, by the ERC in their own investigation, found to be not treated properly. That they recruited someone else who was vastly inferior to him in the process. So guess what they want? Me to fight the case now. I said, if I fight the case, then suddenly Vishnu Prasad, who is no member of the PPP, will become, oh, I'm fighting the case because he's Indian, and secondly, because he's PPP. That will become the narrative out there. So you in the ERC, you had an adverse finding. Look at the report. The report is devastating. You have the powers of remedy. Why not exercise the remedial powers and make a declaration as to what should happen to give justice to the man? Why are you bringing it to me? But of course, that will not happen with people like, now I realize why. With this Barrington Braithwaite, who is part of the campaign of lies, gone back to this 1 million times we have debunked this, but still gone back to this campaign of 400. But this is a dying breed. And of course, our dear friend Lincoln Lewis, again too, he said that, I said the president is no longer president, he's a caretaker president. I stand by that, and was reckless for me to say that Granger is no longer President Granger. He is caretaker President Granger. Lincoln Lewis has to understand that that's a very important adjective to the caretaker, not imposed on Granger by Jagdeo, but by the Caribbean Court of Justice. He is caretaker President Granger, not President Granger any longer, caretaker president. He is just there hanging on until we have elections. So when he behaves as though he has full powers, he is fraudulently doing so, contrary to the decision of the CCJ. And if you have a caretaker president and a caretaker government, you have caretaker ministers, including a caretaker rubber stamp prime minister. So that is it, Lincoln Lewis. But Lincoln Lewis would find common ground with this cabal there. Because Lincoln Lewis, I think he was upset that I exposed his wrongdoings in the industry, in the bauxite sector, and at OMI, about how he betrayed the workers. He has a history of doing this, a history of betrayal of workers. But the TUC have never had proper elections. And, you know, he has common ground there because he has a geriatric cabal there too. You could never, he president for life over there, you know, or whatever, general secretary, or I don't even know his designation. They operate, he talks about Jagdeo 2 terms, but he's been there. I signed that into law, the 2-term limit. I'm now leader of the opposition. I can't be president again. So that's not a big issue. Why don't you sign term limits over at TUC there? But that will never happen. Coretta and all of the others will have none of the young people there. They can't get to the top there because the geriatric cabal that loves the other geriatric cabal on Vicention Road here, they find common ground. So I don't pay attention to him. When you see Lincoln Lewis, he's defending his own himself. And then oil and gas. The final thing is oil and gas. I just wanted to say in passing that you saw the confusion between Felix and Retimiah. They didn't know who set up the meeting. Felix said, oh, I stand by it. It's Retimiah who called me. Retimiah said, me? I didn't do that. It's somebody, right, Felix? It's a bunch of lies. And then Felix said also, I didn't want to bring the people to my ministry. I want everybody come to my ministry. Although the next day they were there at his ministry. It's a ton of lies. Then Retimiah jumped in and said, oh, the cell phones, we asked people to turn off the cell phones because we didn't want them to take bits of what we said and make it public. Which bits were you afraid of them making public? And it wasn't asking people to turn off their phones. They patted everyone down and they had to deposit their phones at a table. That's even worse than many high security areas. So they were caught with the lies. Now, and the lies were telling people from Haiti and Africa that the PPP will throw them out if the PPP wins the elections. That is an absolute lie. We, as I said the last meeting, students from Africa can come here, or universities, They can come, they have a right to come to Guyana just like anyone else, as including the Haitians. But people have to come, respect our laws, everyone, whether they're from Asia or Africa, India, or wherever, China. They must respect our laws. And so why they had to meet only with that bunch to spread the racism. So it's a lie. And the gaming authority now, that's another corrupt cabal here. And here, listen what Harman said. This good, you know, the Christian value that they talk about. He wants to promote responsible gambling now. When I was we were passing the legislation to give casino licenses for the hotels. We limited it to 3 in Region 4, 3 per region. We had to limit it. I met with the entire religious community because they were saying that, you know, we don't want to promote gambling. Secondly, we put in place their restrictions as to how people can access these facilities, etc. And what type of building you had to put up. To get a license, you had to put up a hotel with 150 rooms with a 4-star service. So we wanted to get the investments in the hotel so that more Guyanese can work there. And we got one operating. They've been taking bribes to prevent even the Marriott moving forward. And now they've given out licenses to everybody, and there's a proliferation across the country. And now Harman is saying, you promote responsible gambling. Responsible gambling. These are the same people who used to accuse the PPP of saying, oh, you know, the PPP want to give out licenses to gamble and stuff like that. It's not a value in keeping with the scriptures, that we shouldn't promote it. Now he is doing that. But that over there is an entirely corrupt cabal. And then this brings me finally to the oil and gas sector. So I started with the director, and God helps us if he is in charge, and he is in charge, where his foot bottom became shiny, and he knew we had oil in Guyana. You know, and he is the one now who's leading luminary on the oil and gas sector, and he's busy campaigning all around Guyana. In fact, misleading young people. So I don't know what due diligence they did on the company that will audit Exxon's Mobil pre-contract costs. But I wouldn't be surprised to find out that you have some sort of issue here too, shenanigans, and we are looking at it. I would not be surprised. But what looked, and I see the minister using taxpayers' money to host a reception at the Marriott for the arrival of the FPSO. That's taxpayers' money being used there. So we're not even collecting money from the oil and gas sector. We're spending it because the First Lady went on an all-paid by Exxon trip to Singapore to commission the vessel. I thought that's it. Now we have another ceremony that we have to pay for again because the vessel just arrived here. And then we need a third one when it starts production, and a fourth one when they turn on or get the money, the first money. We'll have a celebration. This is it: parties, celebration, monuments, parks, painting building green, etc. Good at this sort of nonsense. So Stacia jumps in now. This Stacia, Godfrey Stacia, who has been strangely quiet for recently, but there are lots of things I'll come back to in that I have now. I've been gathering up some information, and we'll look at GRA shortly. But he says GRA will level playing field for local suppliers in all sector. And I don't know how he's become a policy maker now. You don't have a local content policy. He is not a policy maker. But he will level the playing field for local suppliers in all sector. This is pure nonsense. I don't understand if these people take us seriously to make these statements. Or it's a sense of power. We have little lords everywhere. So suddenly he wakes up one morning and says, oh, I can do this. It's illegal. You have to have a policy. You have to have a legislation. He is a technical person. He's not a policy maker. He has to implement the policy or the legislation. And there are none now. There's no such policy to look out for our interests. The government has abdicated its responsibility. So what is he going to do? What is he going to do? He's going to level the playing field. This is all another PR stunt on their part. I'll end there. Thank you.
Has the Carter Center reached out to you yet for a meeting? And if so, when will you be meeting?
I met with the Carter Center. I met with them. But I don't invite the whole media, you know, to make it a media circus. And not that the media is a circus before I get into trouble with that. But to bring everybody, because like I saw Basil was meeting with the people, a routine meeting, invited the whole media. You put people on the spot. You know, you can once in a while. So I've been meeting a lot with the international community. I met with the Carter Center, and we discuss elections and the conduct of elections, credible elections, early elections. That's what they're here for, and constitutional compliance, that this government is illegal.
I might understand that by you taking umbrage to the AG's challenge to the Chief Justice's order, that you are supportive of giving overseas-based Guyanese the right to vote. Okay, so the AG said yesterday that the Chief Justice, in saying that you can't remove names from the register, it implies that overseas-based Guyanese should be voting.
When this Attorney General speaks about law, you have to get a law student to try to interpret and what he means and to check whether it's factual. Imagine the Chief Justice of Guyana, who has just had her decision upheld on the no confidence motion by the CCJ. And you're comparing her with Basil Williams. And what he says, what the Chief Justice said, is that there is a Constitution of Guyana. And the Constitution of Guyana does not provide for you to remove people's names from the database unless, except in defined circumstances. Any attempt to do so, to deregister people, will be illegal. So, in the past, we had overseas voting, when PNC used to pad the voters list, and you could vote abroad. There is no overseas voting now. So even as a Guyanese, and once you're 18 years old, you have a right to vote. But you can't exercise that franchise if you're in New York. The Chief Justice said, if you come home, you have to go to the division in which you're registered, and you can vote there. But the Constitution does not have a residency requirement. In fact, the new Constitution removed the residency requirement from that. And so for him, he has to understand the difference between overseas voting and the residency requirement. Basil Williams met me at the cricket. It was an ordeal. And he said to me, I won everything. And I said, how come if you won, you're appealing? You're the strangest man in the world that you won and you appeal, you're winning. But this is Basil Williams. He is in a different world. Not a world of earthly nature, but a different sort of world. So I wouldn't put too much store. Please don't, with what Basil tell you. You just write wrong stories.
It seems like you're opposed to ID card being produced at this time, are you?
The thing is that it's just another delaying tactic. It's
not in the critical
right. It's delaying tactic, and it's also costly. So
they have the money in the budget.
that is this up-new mentality. If we have the money there, spend it out. Spend it out. My thing is that if it gives the new guys the ID, the new registrants and stuff, people have ID. A lot of people already, those who are already on the database. If you can produce the ID and it's outside the critical path, and you can buy the equipment and do so in GCOM, that's not a big issue for us. It is just them making an issue now of it, because their commissioner said it's not part of the critical path.
You were never explicit about this encouraging statement that you got from
I was today. Today I mentioned, that is why I never was explicit, and I explained why. That I was hopeful that it didn't have to come from me, that the commission would have, or the secretariat would have issued a press release of the meeting. Remember when they met the private sector commission, they issued a press release, and in that press release, it says what the chairperson said, the chairman said. So if you go back to that press release, they met with the private sector commission, and this is what happened. Now, I was expecting a release to come out from the meeting which says that these issues were discussed, and the chairperson said we are working in the presence of all the commissioners, APNU and government and opposition commissioners, that we are working towards the elections by the before the end of the year.
She said that.
She said that. And so that is what I was hoping for, because consistent with the past practice. So I didn't want to go and say, Jagdeo just come out and like to run his mouth. Let them come and let them make this statement. So to my surprise, I saw something contradicting that from the secretariat, and then Vincent Alexander saying something totally different. So that was said. That would be part of the minutes of the meeting. And now I suspect, that's why I suspect, it panicked them, so they're running over there now trying to delay again, come up with some new issue to delay the elections. But I did not want to, that's why I said vaguely positive. I don't want a positive meeting.
Can I ask you?
Yeah, sure.
I have 3 questions.
Sure.
The first question I'd expect a yes or no answer. You said earlier. Yeah, I don't want to know.
This is, I'm not in the box here, though.
You said the food bills. You should see these food bills. Have you seen this?
I've seen some, yes, I've seen some.
Just let them must pass them on.
All right, okay.
I come down from Puerto Rico, and I'm seeing, in your words, duplicity with the PPP and the campaign. We can create daycares for single mothers. They have this government has been doing that across different regions. Are you aware, or you weren't aware of that?
The thing is that but that doesn't preclude us doing it. It's not duplicitous. It is something that if they have done it, I've not seen major evidence of it. But if that's so, kudos for them. I know also that, but in the meantime, they have thousands of mothers who had jobs now, lost their jobs. So there is nothing, if we say we want to do this too, what's duplicitous about that? In fact, it's a good thing.
Well, I just wanted to use
No. It's, well, thank you for using my words, but we want to also do that.
Oh, cool.
But where, by the way, where have they come and created this? No, but like how many?
They call it early learner center or something like that.
Oh, that might.
Daycares anymore.
All right, can you send me a few, because that would be a little shocking,
I'm gonna be posting
because
on
they're
Facebook
so
this.
incompetent. Send me a few of these too, and then I can give you a comment on it, right?
Roger. Now, campaigning. You were showing about them campaigning and using state funds to campaign. This is one that I remember. Gaio did campaign at one time for the PPP, pre-2015. Big campaign sign for the PPP, but it was paid for by Gaio.
I don't recall that Guy were paying any money on behalf of the PPP.
It was a campaign sign.
Oh,
So I don't know that
like yes, yes.
Similar to what's going on.
Yeah,
with this
but
government.
okay, but you're saying you give one instance. So there's always, that's why I said degree. Here, I'm showing you hundreds of cases, $2 billion of outreach. What do you think the 2 billion, is it going to take care of people? 2 billion of outreach, paying for all of these things. So you're naming one instance that Gaiwa may have put up a sign, okay, never vote PPP. I'm sure it did not vote PPP at the bottom. It didn't have vote PPP. I'm sure you wouldn't see Donald Ramatar in a red short on the sign. I'm sure about that, I can tell you, because you can send me the sign too. Please send me that sign. I'm sure, but that's one thing I'd put my head on the block, that you will never see Ramatar with a red short on there, turning on a tap and say, promise fulfill, vote PPP Civic, right? I can put my head on the block for that. I can't remember all the things, but I can put my head on the block for that.
As it relates to your call for international presence at GCO, can you say when you think this should start, and it's not a bit of long, can you?
It immediately, and I'm sure that the international community is just waiting for the request. They're just waiting for the request. But immediately it could start. When I met with the international community, this was a few months back, this was particularly in relation to UN. I asked, is that offer still on the table? And this was several months back, and they said, yes, the offer is on the table. We're ready to move swiftly. Since then, I've spoken with the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, who is prepared to help, and many other bilateral donors.
And as it relates to PR, you mentioned Mercury. Was the contract for that company extended?
Yes, last week I said yes.
Okay, up to when?
Well, it's in increments of 3 months.
Same.
Yes, the same condition.
And same cost?
Yes, the same, yes.
And have you hired any other such companies?
No, we have not.
And this is off anything you would have mentioned. As it relates to GPS, can you say what your party has planned to increase the capacity of?
Well, if you look at the manifesto, the whole thing is, I can speak about 2 hours on energy, but let me just quickly say that the plan was to bring in the hydropower, which would have put 160 megawatts of renewable power in the system. So that immediately we would have had new capacity, 160 megawatts of power, which should have been in place by mid-2017. They killed that, and they said they're going to do solar, wind, a whole range of things. You know the history. I'm not going to go through that. And so far, they have done very little in bringing in new capacity. So what has happened, the old sets that were there under the PPP that we bought are still being used. Some of those sets are 20-something years old. They're not in reserve now. They're being used as base load. So any issue that with the sets, you'd have problems. So they then terminated the Wärtsilä people and brought in a new set of people. So then they had issues with sourcing parts. I heard they sourced the parts not from the supplier, the proprietary parts. They brought parts from another part of the world. That had created problems with the alternator, etc. So major problems on the generation side. Then on the transmission side, we had a ton of money there that we left to improve transmission, so that not just generating more power, but making sure it's more stable, in the communities, etc. That has moved forward a bit, but they had 2 corrupt contracts, massive contracts for meters, etc., which we intend to investigate. Over $5 million US above the next lowest tenderer that they awarded it to. $5 million US. And I don't know if Patterson was discussing that in China too. So that is the issue. Right now, the situation, they start talking about amending the law to buy power, etc. It's stopgap. They have no vision, no plan for this sector. Our plan is resuming discussions on Amila, immediately starting to move forward on that project, but recognizing that that project will take some time into the future, because it takes about 4 or 5 years to be completed. You can't wait on that to bring in power now, baseload power. So moving on a gas power plant, because we believe that that could be done easily, but that will come in by 2021, maybe 2021. That's 200 megawatts. So we'll get up to nearly 350, nearly 360 megawatts if you do 200 from that. And then we, in the short term, almost immediately, through a transparent process, not through backroom deals, we have to get emergency power. That means fossil fuel for a while, until to bring an end to the blackouts, etc. So that will be the first priority. So short, medium, and a longer term. So immediately move to fossil fuel, then the medium term well, by 2021 to get to the gas-fired power plant, and then the hydro in about four years. That should put over 400 megawatts of new power. Right now, we're generating under 200 megawatts. So that would allow us to do street lights. It would allow us to reduce the cost of electricity significantly. It would allow us to do a number of other things, both for household and the other side. Parallel to that, we have a plan for transmission, how we'll improve transmission, etc. And then for the isolated grids, we'll go back to, like now, Valder Lawrence is all around the interior and the others, rolling out internet for the communities, if you go there. But we left 17 million US dollars for ICT in the hinterland from the Norwegian fund. Now they're doing it and calling it their own. So each community, we had already, before we left, identified 100 communities and wired these not the major area where we're going to put a commercial solar panel. Of the 215 Amerindian communities we have, 100 had already been identified. We wired the building and we went to procure the solar panels. Then the government changed. So we'll resume that. We'll upgrade the residential solar panels, the isolated systems like Leg 1 and Wakenham and the others. Those isolated systems will have like either wind power or solar power. We have a combination, a suite of measures that will deal with the power situation. But everything is planned already. Everything is planned. If you talk to them, they're clueless. The IDB did an energy mix study. They just hid it, an energy mix study years ago. They can't, the ability to either conceptualize or implement things is missing from this government. Totally missing. You can ask me now and I can tell you. And this is not like I know it alone. Every PPP member knows this.
But the casino license, just to get back to that, you said there were plans to give 3 for every region?
The maximum 3. Right. Not that you give 3, but a maximum of 3 in region 4, the legislation.
Were there plans to give person 1, 2, and 3 these licenses on the PPP?
I think there was, the Marriott had one, Marriott government owned, and you had an MOU with Sleep-In. And then you had one already with Princess had one. So Marriott had a license, their permission, and then the third one would have been the MOU with Sleep-In.
As a Sleep-In hotel, give you any, I know this is community, you say they talk to you very often. Has they given you any explanation as to why they're not being granted the license?
Oh, nightmare and requests for bribes. Requests for bribes, including from the Gaming Authority and from one of the same gentlemen who went, I'll call his name a little bit later. He took an incorporated company. When I check the company's incorporation, it's not in the name of the same person, but I call that person's name here. And I guess I should mention it. Sean Hopkinson went with a company incorporated called Pro Gaming, and he said, if you, we will give the gaming authority will give the license to this company if you pay us $2 or $3 million you can buy the license from this company. US dollars. You can buy. And the guy said, no, I have an MOU. I had an MOU since that's why I built this hotel with 150 rooms. I made an investment. Why should I be buying a license? And that was what they were trying to do. So the gaming authority would have given this company called Pro Gaming the license, and then the sleep-in people had to buy that license from the Pro Gaming, and everybody would have made money. But I know a ton of these things. I don't want to overload my press conference. Tons of corrupt practices. When I spoke about the gaming authority and corruption here, that is what I'm talking about.
Well,
companies coming in from
He said a number of issues were raised with the sleeping hotel, and they were sent back to the drawing board to get these.
Well, you asked about that. Those were the issues raised. Money. Yeah, he's right. It doesn't conflict with anything. I don't think it conflicted with anything that he said. I don't think it conflicted. But on the other hand, you have some people, foreign companies that have come in here and quickly go through the process of getting licenses. They never built a hotel. They never put up 150 rooms and employed thousands of Guyanese. They just walk into this country as foreigners and could get help immediately because they pay.
Can you name one of those companies?
All right, I'll give you later. You want too much today. You want too much today. I just gave you want me to call a name, I call a name. I call a name because he could sue me because I know, and I mentioned to the guy that I will say it. And he said, okay, you go ahead because I'm fed up with this now. I've waited for very long. I've answered every question, even from when the Soku people tried to collect a bribe from him. The Soku people tried to collect a bribe. And so this is what's going on now. Shakedown, every single agency has a shakedown department. In Ramjatan's in that area, it's gone licenses for sale. And you have a price depending on what type of weapon you want. Felix's ministry, you can decide your visa. If a 3 months visa has a price versus a 6 months visa, a work permit for 1 year has a different price than the others. That is what's going on. Every department has a shakedown crew. And they work through these other people who go around collecting millions of dollars from people. And millions of dollars every day. And then that is why they get worked up every time. They don't want to hear elections. They don't want to hear elections because it'll cut short all of this sort of thing.
You think that
Thank you.
opposition leader you'd have a much more interest in revealing this sort of stuff? This sort of, what were you discussing?
I just call names, so you can't say I didn't call a name. So but there's too many things that come to me. But we are filing them away. We know what are the places to look at immediately. So, thank you.